Hello, everybody. Good to see you all. Hope your mornings went well. Asad has introduced my co-panelists here today. I think we'll have a nice conversation. We've got two really experienced AppZen veterans, each with different parts of our product. So Danielle and SCI have been running our expense audit product for quite some time. And John and Georgetown have been using our AP product, one of our first AP customers, and have been running it for quite some time as well. So I'll start out, Danielle, maybe you can start and just tell us a little bit about yourself, your company, the role, and get us going. Yeah.
Sounds good. I'm Danielle Hanno. I'm with SCI. We are a death care company who owns over 2,000 funeral homes and cemetery across North America. As they mentioned, I'm the supply chain director over the COE, and with that is the P-card program and the AppZen tool. We also have cash reimbursements, but those are actually run under our AP department. So with our P-card program, we have over 4,000 cardholders. For expenses altogether, we have 1 million transactions and $300 million in spend. So our goal was to have 100% audit pre-approval, have some policy compliance, have some spend and managerial oversight, and hope to save some money along the way.
Great. Thank you, Danielle. John, how about you? Tell us about yourself.
Yeah, John Hendricks. I'm with Georgetown University. We're a private institution of higher ed located in Washington, D.C. Been around since 1789. I've been at Georgetown 15 years. I took this role in December 2022. We went live with AppZen Autonomous AP in August 2022. So I missed out on the implementation and go live, but I was hired shortly thereafter to sort of stabilize the tool and then bring some change to the organization, given what we were able to realize with the tool.
Great. I bet 15 years at Georgetown almost feels like been there since 1789,
Yep.
Right? But that's a long storied institution. It's really exciting to see you guys taking advantage of artificial intelligence. So John, maybe you can tell us about, before AppZen, before you guys had AppZen in place, what were some of the challenges that you were facing accounts payable, and what really drove you to, go out into the market and look at how to do things differently?
So our accounts payable operation prior to AppZen was really dysfunctional. We were always under-resourced. We had a number of people on the team, but all they did all day long was just data entry, right? You get an invoice document and you key it into the system. This is important work, but it's not particularly valuable work, right? And so we had 6 FTEs that were just doing that. They were not really capable of keeping up with the volume. So at any given point, AP was running between 30 and 90 days behind. That means they were processing invoices that had been received 30 to 90 days prior, right? Regardless of when the invoice was actually issued. Additionally, black box, right? No one outside of AP knew what was going on. I did not work in AP at the time, and it was always a real pain point. I had no idea what was happening with these invoices, why, the supplier was calling me about non-payment. It was just not clear. A consequence of that is that a lot of upstream dysfunction got blamed on AP, right? And it was only when we started clearing up some of these issues in AP that we realized it's not all AP's fault. Some of it was, but there's a lot of other things wrong that we have to look at as well.
Yeah, that's great, John. I think there's probably others who can relate to, the downstream. You're kind of the face to the payable, right? But you're not necessarily the cause to the obstacle in a lot of cases. So, coming out of that, working through the lack of visibility and lack of, efficiency was really kind of the big opportunity for Georgetown, right? Great. Switch over for you now, Danielle. So, before AppZen, I think you guys were, stuck in kind of the manual world. I think a lot of our folks in the room can relate to what it was like before you had artificial intelligence, really doing kind of a sampling of auditing. Tell us a little bit about how you were doing that and how that was working for your business.
We were only auditing our P-card program. As I mentioned, we have around 1 million transactions. We had 3 FTEs offshore who had specific criteria. Any transaction that was over 1,000 They would go back into the system, look at the receipt, and make sure that all the details matched the line item. So we're only looking at one thing to see if the receipt was accurate. I'm hoping that was maybe around 10% of our total spend that they were looking at. The process was very manual. It was grueling. If they did find where the receipt didn't match, they had to email the cardholder, probably wait a couple weeks, then they'd have to escalate that and then escalate it. So it really was months before we got that proper receipt documentation back. So a very inefficient process to manually audit a very small portion of our program.
Yeah, it's interesting when you think about employing an auditing tool to the reimbursement of employees. A lot of times people have this perception that it's going to be a bad thing for the employees, that we're going to be looking at more. But when you have an onerous process like you just described, there's employees waiting a very long time to get reimbursed in a process like that. So can certainly relate to that pain. John, back to you now. So again, as one of the early adopters of AppZen technology, you guys also leaned right into one of the most exciting pieces of technology that we've introduced, and our market is, really responded. Kunal mentioned earlier today that our inbox tool is our fastest growing, most widely adopted tool, and is really candidly attacking what I believe has become kind of a surprise problem in finance operations, right? The biggest shift I think we can all relate to, the biggest shift in invoicing that's happened over the past couple of decades is not EDI or electronic invoicing. It's really the shift from suppliers sticking a piece of paper in an envelope and sending it through the mail to now they just go into their billing system and they press send an invoice, right? And that triggers an email with an attached PDF that lands in an inbox that's overflowing with invoices. So I think anybody in the accounts payable function can relate to that problem just kind of sneaking up on AP operations and becoming a real burden for those organizations. So John and the Georgetown team adopted this technology very, very shortly after we launched it. So John, I'm really curious to hear, what are some of the value elements that you're seeing and some of the things that have, really improved the way your operation and what you're looking forward to?
Yeah, one of the very nice things is that, if someone reaches out with an inquiry about an invoice document, the tool automatically surfaces the relevant records, right? So your analysts or your people manning the inbox don't have to go in and do a search to see if this thing's in the system. It's right there. It's presented to them. Right? That may not take a lot of time for a very efficient worker on each individual email that they respond to. But over the course of a week, right, that adds up. So we're eliminating that lookup time. It's done for them. Additionally, right, we had some difficulty in getting consistent answers between various members of our team, right, to inquiries. Some people were very, very good about providing a wealth of information that would leave the person with whom they were corresponding with a very clear idea of where everything stood. And some would provide these short answers, 1 or 2 words, that opened up a wealth of other questions that then would probably come out over the course of 4 or 5 more emails. With this tool, right, you can kind of ensure consistency in response by determining at the outset, here's what the response should be. And this is not me knocking on people, but, unlike certain individuals, if you have to tell 3, 4, 5 times, here's how it has to be. With a tool like this, you kind of tell it once and it remembers, right? So a little easier to train and a little easier to get consistent answers.
Yeah, and I think, John, we were talking at lunch earlier, right? You're on that, when we presented earlier, you're on that first rendition of the product, right? Where we're tagging the emails within the inbox, categorizing them, and then proposing the responses. But you've seen a sneak peek in what's coming, right? So as you see the vision of what the workbench will provide with the inbox product, what are you thinking is going to be really helpful for your team?
Well, the way that we handle our inbox currently is that we have shifts. And an analyst is assigned a shift for half a day at a time, and they respond to any inquiry that comes in during that shift, right? Once we migrate this into the platform and we're able to use the assignment feature, right? An email gets assigned to an analyst on the basis of the supplier whose invoice is at issue, which means that that's also how we assign processing and review and everything of invoices within Autonomous AP. That means the person answering the question is the subject matter expert on this supplier, right? So it's not asking somebody who is dealing with a completely different group of suppliers to answer a question about somebody they don't really have any experience with. It's going to go to the right person the first time. Also, because we're going to have this ability to assign these things, we'll be able to track how quickly is each analyst able to turn around these emails, how many of these emails generate subsequent follow-up inquiries, that sort of thing, to see how effective everyone is being at this part of their jobs.
Yeah, that's great, John. So I think what we're doing is we're taking a problem that's just extremely chaotic right now in a really unorganized inbox and allowing you to kind of ticketize every single transaction, in the form of an email and monitor that through closure. So I think we're all excited to see how that pans out for your world. Danielle, when you guys were really looking at your problem, you guys started and you actually looked at like post-payment audit, right? And you moved away from that. So tell me, like, what motivated and what did you find in post-payment audit that wasn't really effective? And what's the difference been now that you're doing pre-payment audits?
Yeah. So we actually did implement a audit solution. It was looking at all of our transactions after the fact. And our number one goal was to find fraud. But as you can imagine, those decisions were already made. Somebody submitted it and a manager approved it. So when we went back and we found some, precarious things, there was always a good reason for why they had that spent. And so we were just spinning our wheels on, good reasons on why those purchases were made. A really good reason for one that we found was strip clubs. We actually found a restaurant/strip club. But they actually had a good reason for it. We do have sales in our company because we sell cemetery plots and stuff like that. And we were going to sign the contract with the family who owns the strip club. And so while we were there, we incurred a meal expense. But I mean, we're talking like $1 million sale. And so after the fact, because they had that good reason, so I think after that, we're like, okay, there's nothing we can do post-payment. Oh, we're done with this. We need to rethink our business case, and our business case is really around risk. People don't know our policy, so let's have a compliancy around our policy. Let's help managers make informed decisions, so we can have a note in the system that says, "Hey, I've tracked this. It says strip club. It's up to you whether you're going to approve it or not." So we're having some accountability on the manager side. So it really has helped us reduce risk. We're making real-time decisions, so there's no after the fact. We don't have to recuperate costs. So it's just really been effective in helping us with policy compliance and maybe teaching our associates to not misuse the program.
Yeah, I think a lot of us work in T&E, right? It is one of the most interesting spaces I've ever worked in, where you can actually find a legitimate reason to spend business funds at a strip club, right?
The restaurant side.
Good clarification.
Yeah.
But we see all kinds of different types of expenses that come through for our customers. And one of the things that I think is interesting that we, hear consistently from the SCI team is their business is very unique. And there are a lot of expenses within the SCI policy that would probably be violations in another business, but they're actually valid expenses at SCI, right? So that's one of the things that I think we can recognize is really powerful about the AppZen technology is the ability to configure it very specifically and precisely to the business that you're running, and getting those rules and applications lined up properly for the business. I think is something that took a little while to get there with SCI, but I think we're there now for the most part. So John, we talked a minute ago. In the early days before AppZen, you guys back in 1789, you guys were really just pounding invoices in, and it was really just a function of just get the invoices in, right, and then cross your fingers, hope everything's right, and get them paid. Now that you have, you referred to it initially as a black box, really no visibility. Now that you have AppZen in place, how has the job changed? What is the team doing differently, and how are they interacting with the stakeholders and constituents of accounts payable differently?
So, the old way of doing things did not allow us to prioritize certain invoices over others, right? Because all you have is a box folder that shows you the date a file was loaded. That's basically all you can do is say, all right, give me the oldest one. Now, right, because of the data that is extracted by AppZen, we can prioritize the processing of invoices along any number of variables, right? Due dates, amounts, etc. Supplier, whatever you want. So now, right, the team has strict guidance to have a certain sort of prioritization schema throughout the day to ensure that our big high dollar items are getting attended to quickly, because those are the ones that tend to get senior leadership very upset if they don't get paid on time. Make sure that if we're coming up against a due date, give some time to this. Let's make sure we do everything in our power to get this in the system. So that has been super helpful. Previously, I mentioned earlier, right, a lot of AP's dysfunction obscured upstream dysfunction. What we saw is a lot of times, purchase orders weren't getting issued until an invoice came in, right? Most people didn't even think of a purchase order as anything other than a mechanism by which you get an invoice processed and paid. Not what it is, right, which is how you place an order. At the time, invoice comes in, somebody from AP reaches out to a department. We have this invoice. Let me get a PO for you. PO gets created. Then our team goes in and looks at the PO and processes the invoice in such a way as to ensure that it doesn't fall into any sort of exception and gets paid as quickly as possible, regardless of what the invoice actually ought to look like, right? So you might have an itemized list of like 12 different types of good. This all gets lumped together as one maybe services line or something instead, right? Because that's how the PO was set up, because our folks in the procurement space just, aren't very sophisticated in how they create these things, or weren't at the time. So you get these invoices created and they're not created accurately. They get paid, but they don't actually reflect what you're doing. So if you ever want to go back and audit this transaction, you can't go look at the general ledger. You can't go look at the invoice record in our ERP. You actually have to go and download the file, the supporting documentation, put your eyes on it and say, what's going on here? That's, not good for anybody, right? You can't report on that. You have to go look at it. So now, right, the guide is you always process the invoice to make it match that document so that then we can go and report. And if we ever have an audit question, they don't need to go look at the file, because they can rely on the invoice record or how it hits the GL. That's going to be accurate, right?
Yeah, that's great, John. And I think, I was just sitting in the customer advisory board earlier, and I think what you just described is, a symptom that I think a lot of us are really starting to latch onto as an opportunity, is the fact that once you put a proper accounts payable system in place, you start to expose other vulnerabilities in the stream of invoice to pay process, right? And you guys were able to, I remember speaking with Rico in the very early days, and he was like, we really don't really have a procurement function. They don't really know how to do this at all. That was probably 2 years ago now. Since then, you guys have come a long way. That procurement function has matured significantly. And I think you guys have a much more robust kind of invoice to pay or procure to pay process than you did. And who would have thought that by implementing an AP product, you could have actually had a big impact on your procurement practices. One of the things that came up in the customer advisory board that we were talking about is this very symptom, the fact that downstream accounts payable is really held hostage by the upstream activity that drives the accounts payable process, right? So one of the things that we're contemplating as we think about the data that we sit on, right? Data is gold, and AppZen sits on a lot of data with our customers, is applying analytics to that spend data and looking for trends and patterns within the spend data to try and improve upstream processes, right? So if we can find a business unit that has the highest incidence of price exceptions, we can go back and talk to that procurement leader and say, can you please ask your buyers to get the pricing right on those purchase orders, right? That's good for all parts of the business, but not least of which is accounts payable benefits, because if those invoices and POs match automatically, they can get paid without being reviewed or touched by humans. The suppliers get paid more quickly. The transaction doesn't get escalated to the buyer. There's just a lot of friction that gets removed out of the process if we're able to improve that. So these kinds of discoveries that we're gaining by working with organizations like Georgetown or having these conversations with our customer advisory board are going to translate into new features and availability for our product. So exciting stuff. Okay, Danielle. So you've been, as we said, you've been live for how many years now?
Over 4 years.
Over 4 years, right? So it's been a journey. Early days was definitely a lot of discovery and work around how we implement AppZen for your particular business. But now that you're there, what does it look like? What are some of the things that you did to your policy specifically or adjusted to the way that you're managing your T&E that's different now that you think has really helped the way that you're paying your employees back?
Yeah. Well, it was important for us to enforce our policies, and we did realize we have a P-card policy, we have a cash reimbursement policy through HR, and we have the T&E policy that's through the travel program. So all of our policies said something a little bit different. And so we had to really align our policies so that we were giving the same message to everybody. And in giving that same message, we had to put that message into our rules and the tool. So I'd say what was super helpful for us was being able to distinguish between cash reimbursements and P-card, because there are some differences in what we need to look at. So that's been super helpful. The nature of our business, as I mentioned, we're a death care company. There's some reoccurring transactions that we do on a daily basis that, thank God, there's thresholds in the system by category that we can tailor the system to. We have Apple iTunes for funeral services. We have death certificates and obituaries. I know it sounds morbid, but like at the corporate office, you don't feel it as much. But these are thousands of transactions in a day, and they're normal business routine. So it's us understanding what was normal part of our business and the less riskier place. So we know that for this expense category, we don't have to look at things under 500 because these are our typical business. And it just really helped us focus in on what we need to look at according to the policies that are in place.
Yeah, so driving a lot of efficiency, right? What I think is impressive, she hasn't uttered this number yet, but she has uttered $300 million in expense reimbursement each year.
So it's between P-card and reimbursement total.
Yeah. And how many people do you have auditing all of this work now?
Technically one.
Yeah.
We have one auditor, and then we have some supporting players when there's too much. So we really had to tailor the system to get to only what was truly risky.
Yeah, so when we have business reviews with the SCI team, they're hyper-focused on efficiency because they run such a lean shop. So it's something I'm extremely proud of, that we can, deliver an expense program, paying almost $300 million annually and having one person oversee all of that outgoing spend. So great work, Danielle. That's really impressive. So John, if we come back and look at your team, right, this is something I think we talk a lot about. And there's a lot of kind of fear and uncertainty around artificial intelligence. And what does that mean for the people that are doing the job today? Are we going to put these people out of work? How does their job change? We actually had this conversation as well in the customer advisory board, where the team was saying, now that we have, especially with some of the things that Kunal was introducing today, where we now have a low code or code free environment where you can actually adjust the models yourselves. How do we take advantage of the time and the availability of the teams, and what do we do differently, and how do we restructure the teams and their roles and their responsibilities? So John, I think you guys had some pretty unique circumstances that you guys were able to take advantage of. How did you restructure your teams?
So when I took over AP, we had 8 people that reported to this position, and today we still have 8, right? We didn't get rid of anyone. We just changed what everybody was doing. So we've been able to have some specialists in place that are responsible for, a set of tasks. They are the subject matter expert on these tasks. We expect them to be able to answer any question that arises about said tasks. The sort of frontline AP workers, now they're not spending 90% of their time doing data entry. They're spending a very small amount of their time every week doing data entry. So we've expected them to become subject matter experts on the entire procure-to-pay process, right? So they can identify when there's a problem, and even if it falls outside of AP, help develop a solution for it. When I was being sold on this job, my boss, Rico, had been pitching it to me for months, and I said, I had just taken a different job at the university, and I was in it for less than a year. And I was like, I don't want to leave so soon. And, I was on the verge of just saying no, just final no. And I had reached out to the AP team to get an answer to I thought was a very simple question. And I got bounced between 3 different people, none of whom could answer my question. I got so fed up, I took the job, right? I was like, well, somebody's got to fix this, and it might as well be me. Because these people just did data entry, right? They did not have the bandwidth to sit down and try to understand these processes and to analyze problems. That's no longer the case, right? They have the ability to understand this stuff. We've also done a pretty good job of documenting these processes, which is critical, right? But they can now answer that question for sure. Some things still will throw them from time to time, but still, we have made dramatic gains in what we can expect out of these people in terms of, analysis and problem solving. As such, right, nobody has the same job description that they had when I came in. They're all different now. We also had a lot of attrition. Some people didn't like where we were going, right? They knew that the job was going to change, it was going to be a little bit more demanding. They couldn't just sit here and key invoices anymore. So they left voluntarily, and a few people did not leave voluntarily, but we just decided that we needed to open up these positions and see who would apply, and we gave those positions to the best qualified people, which were new people, right? And we had to invest a little bit of resources into this because we had to pay higher salaries, but the end result is we have a team with a higher level of talent overall, and we are able to then help educate partner offices. Big part of this is procurement, right? A lot of the change that we've seen in procurement hasn't come from procurement. AP dragging them, kicking and screaming the whole way. But we've done it, and part of it has been at the frontline level. My frontline people helping educate the frontline procurement people.
That's great, John, and congratulations. I think, what you've achieved is what a lot of organizations set out to achieve when they think about implementing artificial intelligence. I think, accounts payable is one of those places where a lot of people, really struggle with the day-to-day of the work of just showing up and pounding invoices into an ERP. It's kind of thankless work. It's mindless. It's not very exciting. But if you can change the job like you guys did and look at how can we make the procure-to-pay process better, your team becomes analysts, really valuable analysts that are driving value from the top of the stream to the bottom of the stream. So really impressive and well done. Congratulations. Danielle, since you've been through this for a few years now, there's folks here that maybe aren't quite as far in the journey as you have. What advice would you give them as as they kind of embark on their second and maybe third and fourth years with AppZen? How would you, help them think differently about taking advantage of the products?
I would say endure the journey and hang in there. If you would have asked me 3-4 years ago if I would be up here speaking on AppZen's behalf, it would have been absolutely no. And I actually have mentioned to our rep, I would never speak. This was 3 or 4 years ago, but they worked with us so well to get through those first couple of years, and those were the toughest. First year was integrating with Coupa, so that was just a bit of a struggle on both of our sides to understand how the systems could work together. And then came the false positives. As he mentioned, we have one auditor, and then we had a bunch of people filling in. So we wanted to get very quickly to what we were supposed to be auditing and eliminate a lot of the noise. So we had to get through that. And so finally, we were at a sustainable way to manage the program, reduce risk. Our executives were seeing value in the tool. So it was just super helpful for us.
Yeah, it's been certainly been a very fruitful journey for both parties of the transaction. We've learned an awful lot from SCI, and bluntly, I think we learned an awful lot from all of you in this room. We really do try to show up with big ears and know that we're not going to be perfect, and we're always trying to seek improvement. So thank you for that.
Yeah, so when contract renewal came up, we were very excited to renew because we were at that point where we can actually explore what our behavior was and start to actually analyze our spend. And that's kind of the fun part for a lot of our data scientists.
It's fun parts of data science, looking at expense reports, right?
Because we want to find things.
The fun thing about it being at an event like this is we have peers that get excited about talking about auditing expense reports. I try to get people at cocktail parties excited about my job, and it lands pretty flat. So thank you all for enjoying these kinds of jokes and comedy. So that's the questions that we had to run through for John and Danielle. I'd love to open it up to the audience. Does anybody have any questions that you'd like to ask one or the other of the folks here today? He's got a mic coming.
Do you have specialized people who are doing all the maintenance on the system side, configurations changes, policy changes? So we have one internal integration specialist, right, who works with AppZen's folks to ensure that everything is currently reporting is working correctly, and that the integrations are happening smoothly. I believe we are getting ready to embark on a change, pretty significant change on some of these things. Fortunately, we do have some internal resources, but we don't really need. AppZen's kind of shouldering a lot of this.
For us, we have our P card manager who manages the rules within the tool. And then we also have our other system counterparts. We work very closely with the IT team, so they really manage all the integrations for us. That's the P card manager, the technical.
I just have a quick question on your P card mitigation against fraud. We have kind of a directive to no more P cards and try to phase them out. Of course, procurement loves the P card, so it doesn't go over very well with our procurement team. We've actually switched over to using corporate meeting planning cards because they're entered differently into our PeopleSoft system. It goes through the channels for proper approvals. So just curious if you could walk me through your P card, high level, and how you all mitigate against risk for inappropriate use for the cards.
So we have a one card program. You could use it for general purchases, T&E purchases, or both. You do have to get special approval for the program, and you have to pass a test to have the card. We have 24,000 associates. As I mentioned, we have 2,000 locations. They have to make business purchases on behalf of their location. So our goal with the P card is that there's controls in place. You control which MCCs they purchase through, the dollar amounts, there's single transactions in a day or through the month. So we talked about that benefit, for the company. And then we also get a rebate. So I think talking through that, we get a very hefty rebate. So that helps us sell the program. On the fraud side, that's always been a little bit harder for us to find. But we do have where if an associate has a purchase on the card, either we go after the card holder to get it back, or our bank also provides that money back to us within a certain time frame. So we can fill out a form and say, refund us the money because there was fraud found. So we just have like a number of levers to pull in the event that it happens.
Any other questions? Great. Well, thank you very much.